Lucas woke to the sound of his father's voice, drifting up the stairs. Not shouting, never shouting. Just that steady cadence that meant someone somewhere was getting a briefing before the sun even thought about rising over Arlington. He blinked at his ceiling, at the glow-in-the-dark stars his mom had helped him arrange into actual constellations. Orion's Belt, the Big Dipper. His dad had pointed them out during a rare camping trip to Shenandoah 2 summers ago, back when deployment schedules aligned with family time. The voice downstairs went quiet, a door closed, then footsteps, lighter ones, moved through the hallway below. Lucas pulled on his favorite shirt, the one with the faded Nationals logo, and padded downstairs in socks that had lost their grip months ago. He slid the last 3 steps, catching himself on the newel post his grandfather had carved before Lucas was born. His parents stood in the kitchen, both in civilian clothes. His father wore a Georgetown sweatshirt and jeans, looking almost like a regular dad except for the posture. The way he held his coffee mug like it was a piece of equipment that required proper handling. His mother had on scrubs, her hair pulled back in the tight bun she wore for surgery days. "Morning, baby," his mother said, turning from the counter with a plate of scrambled eggs and turkey sausage. She set it at his usual spot, where a placemat displayed his crayon drawing from 1st grade. A stick figure, family holding hands in front of a house with a flag. "You've got that appendectomy at 7, his father asked her, checking his watch. 7:30, should be done by noon if it's straightforward. She kissed Lucas's forehead, her lips warm. "You have everything for school," Lucas nodded, mouth full of eggs. His father sat across from him, cradling his coffee. "Your mom's going to drop you." "I've got meetings until late." Lucas knew what meetings meant. He'd learned the vocabulary of his father's absences before he'd learned to read chapter books. Briefings, consultations, operational reviews. Words that meant his dad would be somewhere Lucas couldn't know about, doing something Lucas couldn't ask about. "Career day assignment is due today," Lucas said, scraping his fork across the plate. His mother and father exchanged a glance. One of those parent looks that contained entire conversations Lucas could only partially decode. "What did you write about?" his father asked, voice casual but eyes attentive. "Your job, is that okay?" Another glance between his parents, quicker this time. "What exactly did you say?" his mother asked, sitting down beside him. Lucas shrugged. "That you're a 4-star general, that you've served 32 years. That you say leadership is about making people better than they think they can be." His father's expression softened. He reached across the table and squeezed Lucas's shoulder. "That's accurate." "That's good. But Lucas," his mother said, her surgeon voice coming out. The one that was gentle but non-negotiable. "You remember what we talked about? About keeping some things private. I didn't say anything about Korea. Or the other places. I know, baby, I know you're careful." She smoothed his hair. "Just remember that not everyone understands military families. Sometimes people make assumptions." Lucas nodded, but something twisted in his stomach. He was proud of his father. Why did pride have to come with warnings? Jefferson Elementary sat 3 miles from their house in Arlington. A brick building with a mural of diverse children holding hands around a globe. The motto beneath read, "Every voice matters." Lucas had always liked that mural. The way the painted kids looked happy, like they actually wanted to hold hands. His classroom smelled like dry erase markers and the vanilla air freshener misses. Whitmore sprayed every morning at 8:15 exactly. She stood at the front, Her gray hair cut in the same style she'd worn in the faculty photo from 15 years ago. Her cardigan buttoned to the top, despite the radiator that made the room stuffy by third period. "Career day assignments on my desk," she announced, not looking up from her attendance sheet. "Friday is coming faster than you think." Lucas pulled his paper from his folder. He'd written it in his best handwriting, careful block letters that stayed between the lines. He'd even drawn a small American flag in the corner, coloring it with colored pencils instead of crayons, because he was 10 now. Too old for crayons. Deshaun Williams leaned over from the next desk. "What you write about?" "My dad's job. The general thing," Lucas nodded. Deshaun was the only friend he'd told. And only because Deshaun's uncle had served in Iraq and understood about not asking questions. "That's so cool, man," Deshaun whispered. "My dad drives for UPS. I wrote about that." "That's cool too," Lucas said and meant it. Deshaun's dad always had stories about the people on his route. About the old lady who gave him cookies every Thursday. About the dog who'd learned to bring him his own treats. Lucas walked his paper to Mrs. Whitmore's desk, setting it gently on top of the stack. She glanced at it, her eyes scanning the first line. Her expression changed. Just slightly. A tightening around her mouth, a narrowing of her eyes behind her reading glasses. She looked up at Lucas, then back down at the paper, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Return to your seat, Lucas," she said, her voice flat. Lucas walked back, that twist in his stomach returning. He slid into his chair and tried to focus on the math problems Mrs. Whitmore was writing on the board, but his eyes kept drifting to her desk, to the stack of papers she'd pick up during lunch. His phone buzzed in his pocket during silent reading time. He snuck a glance, knowing he'd get in trouble if caught. But the message was from his mother, and she only texted during school for important things. "Dad's briefing got moved up. He'll be back from Korea by 10 tomorrow morning. Thought you'd want to know. Love you. Lucas's heart soared. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. His father would be home, actually home, not just passing through between assignments. He wanted to shout it to tell Deshaun, to run to the office and call his mom back just to hear her confirm it. Instead, he slipped his phone back into his pocket and returned to his book, the words blurring as he calculated hours. 24 until his father landed, 25 until he walked through their front door. He didn't notice Mrs. Whitmore watching him from her desk, didn't see her pick up his assignment during lunch and read it again, slowly this time. Didn't see her reach for her planner and make a note in Friday's box, her handwriting sharp and decisive. She'd already made up her mind about what Lucas was. And no amount of truth was going to change it. Friday morning began with the usual crackle of the intercom. Principal Davis's voice filling every classroom in Jefferson Elementary. Lucas sat at his desk, doodling in the margin of his notebook, counting down the hours. 8 more until his father landed. "Good morning, Jefferson families," Principal Davis said, his voice warm and practiced. "Just a reminder that our career day presentations will begin Monday morning in the gymnasium. We're so excited to hear from our parent volunteers about their important work in our community." Mrs. Whitmore stood by the window, coffee mug in hand, nodding along as if the announcement had been written specifically for her approval. "We'll be hearing from doctors, lawyers, business owners, and many other professionals who make our city great," Principal Davis continued. "Students, remember to thank the parents who take time from their busy schedules to inspire you." The intercom clicked off. Mrs. Whitmore set down her mug and turned to face the class, a smile playing at her lips. "Speaking of career day," she said, walking to the front of the room, "I'm particularly excited that Tyler's father will be joining us. Mr. Bennett works on Capitol Hill, advising senators on policy. That's the kind of career that requires real education and dedication." Tyler Bennett sat straighter in his chair. His polo shirt crisp and pressed, his new sneakers pristine white. He smiled modestly, but Lucas could see the pride in his eyes. "What does your dad do exactly?" Mrs. Whitmore asked Tyler, though she clearly already knew. "He's a senior policy advisor," Tyler said. "He helps write legislation." "Wonderful." "Just wonderful," Mrs. Whitmore beamed. "That's civic engagement at the highest level." Sophia Wilson, sitting 2 rows over, raised her hand tentatively. "Yes, Sophia. My mom signed up too," Sophia said quietly. "She's coming Monday." "Oh," Mrs. Whitmore's smile thinned, "that's nice. What does your mother do?" "She's the head custodian at Georgetown University. She manages the whole cleaning staff for 3 buildings." "I see. Well, all jobs are important, of course." Mrs. Whitmore's tone suggested otherwise. She moved on quickly, picking up a stack of papers from her desk. "Now, let's turn our attention to your My Hero assignments. I've selected a few to be read aloud." Lucas's stomach dropped. His assignment was in that stack. He'd seen her separate certain papers yesterday, setting them aside. Mrs. Whitmore called on Emma first. Emma's hero was her grandmother, a nurse who'd worked through the pandemic. The class listened politely. Mrs. Whitmore nodded throughout, making encouraging sounds. Then came Marcus, whose hero was his uncle, a firefighter. More approving nods. "Lucas Williams," Mrs. Whitmore said, her voice different now, harder. "Please come to the front and read your assignment." Lucas's hands trembled as he stood. He walked to the front, took the paper she offered, and turned to face his classmates. Deshawn gave him a thumbs up. Lucas tried to smile. He began reading. His voice shook at first, then grew stronger as he described his father's career. The deployments, the Bronze Star. The way his dad always called home, no matter what time zone he was in. He read about the 4 stars on his father's uniform, about leading thousands of soldiers, about sacrifice and service. "Stop!" The word cut through the classroom like a blade. Lucas looked up. Mrs. Whitmore stood with her arms crossed, her face hard. "Stop reading," she repeated. "Class, this is exactly what we talked about regarding honesty and character." Lucas's mouth went dry. "Ma'am, what does your father actually do, Lucas?" The question hung in the air. 23 pairs of eyes turned to him. "He's a 4-star general in the United States Army," Lucas said, his voice smaller now. "I told you yesterday." Mrs. Whitmore walked closer, her heels clicking on the linoleum. "Lucas, I have been teaching for 23 years. I know what a general's family looks like. They don't live in Garden Heights apartments. They don't wear sneakers with holes in them. They don't attend public schools in this district." Heat flooded Lucas's face. He looked down at his shoes. The ones he'd worn every day for 8 months because his father had been deployed, and his mother was saving money, and he'd been growing too fast to justify new ones until these literally fell apart. "My dad is a general," Lucas said again, and hated how his voice cracked. "Lucas." Mrs. Whitmore's tone was almost pitying now, which somehow felt worse than anger. "Lying to make yourself seem more important is not character. It's the opposite of character. I'm not lying." The tears came then. Hot and humiliating, sliding down his cheeks in front of everyone. Then why have we never seen him at school events? Why isn't he on the career day list? Because he's deployed. He's in Korea. He lands today at 10. How convenient. Always away on secret missions. She made air quotes with her fingers. And several students shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Mrs. Whitmore, Deson said, standing up. Lucas isn't lying. I've met his dad. He wears a uniform with stars and everything. Mr. Patterson, sit down. But he's telling the truth, principal's office. Now, Deson looked at Lucas, his face torn between solidarity and self-preservation. Lucas gave a tiny shake of his head. Don't make this worse for yourself. Deson grabbed his backpack and walked out, the door closing with a soft click. Mrs. Whitmore turned back to Lucas. She held out her hand. Give me the paper. Lucas handed it over, his fingers numb. She held it up so the class could see. Then, maintaining eye contact with Lucas, she tore it in half. The sound was sharp, final. She tore it again, and again. The pieces fell from her hands like confetti, scattering across the floor around Lucas's worn sneakers. The classroom gasped. Making yourself seem more important than you are, Mrs. Whitmore said, her voice rising. Especially when you come from certain backgrounds, is the opposite of character. It's dishonesty, it's attention-seeking. And in my classroom, it will not be tolerated. Lucas stared at the pieces of paper on the floor. His father's name, written in his best handwriting, visible on several fragments. Bronze star, 4 stars, hero, all torn apart. My dad didn't raise a liar, ma'am, Lucas said. His voice was quiet, but it didn't shake anymore. Mrs. Whitmore's face flushed red. Excuse me, he didn't raise a liar. Everything I wrote is true. Office, now. Bring your things. Lucas walked back to his desk on shaking legs. He gathered his notebook, his pencil case, his backpack. Nobody met his eyes except Sophia, who looked like she might cry too. He walked to the door, his shoulders back despite the tears still streaming down his face. Class, Mrs. Whitmore said behind him, her voice already returning to normal. Let's continue with our next reading. Emma, would you collect those papers from the floor? Lucas stepped into the hallway. The door closed behind him, and he could hear Mrs. Whitmore's voice, cheerful now, asking someone else to read their assignment. As if nothing had happened. As if she hadn't just called him a liar in front of everyone. As if she hadn't torn up his hero. The hallway stretched long and empty before him. The principal's office was at the far end, past the cafeteria, past the library. Past all the classroom windows, where other students sat learning and laughing and living normal Friday mornings. Lucas started walking. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Probably his mom with an update. His dad would land in 90 minutes. Would be home in 2 hours. Would ask about school, about his week, about whether everything was okay. Lucas thought about telling him. Imagined his father's face, the way his jaw would set. The way he'd probably march into school Monday morning in his dress uniform, and make Mrs. Whitmore apologize, but then Lucas imagined something else. His father thinking he couldn't handle his own problems. Thinking his son needed daddy to fight his battles, thinking Lucas was weak. No. He'd figure this out himself, somehow. The principal's office door loomed ahead. Lucas wiped his face with his sleeve and pushed it open. Stepping inside to face whatever came next, the principal's office smelled like old coffee and printer toner. Vice Principal Thornton barely looked up from his computer when Lucas walked in. Have a seat, he said, gesturing at a chair without making eye contact. Lucas sat, his backpack still on his shoulders like armor. Thornton finally glanced over, taking in Lucas's tear-stained face, with the kind of tired expression adults get when they've decided something is just another problem to process. Mrs. Whitmore says you were disruptive in class, disrespectful. Made up stories about your father. Lucas's hands tightened on his backpack straps. I didn't make anything up. Listen, son. Thornton leaned back in his chair. I understand things can be tough. Single-parent homes, it's hard for kids to. My parents are married, Lucas said quietly. Thornton blinked. Oh, well, the point is, making up elaborate stories to get attention isn't the answer. We're going to need to schedule a formal disciplinary conference with your mother. Or guardian, whoever can make it in. Lucas opened his mouth to respond, but Thornton was already typing. You can return to class. We'll be in touch about the conference date. The walk back to room 207 felt longer than the walk away. Through the door's window, Lucas could see career day was in full swing. Tyler's dad stood at the front in his police uniform. 3 other parents sat along the side wall, waiting their turn. Mrs. Whitmore's face brightened with professional cheer as Lucas entered. Ah, Lucas. Please take your seat. He moved to his desk. Nobody looked at him except Deshawn, who mouthed, "You okay?" Lucas didn't answer. Now, Lucas. Mrs. Whitmore's voice cut through the room. Before we continue, I think you owe the class an apology for disrupting our learning time with your behavior. The room went completely still. Lucas looked up at her perfectly pressed blouse and her self-satisfied expression. At the way she stood there expecting him to fold, to submit, to admit he'd been wrong about who his father was. I don't have anything to apologize for, Lucas said. The room gasped. Tyler's dad shifted uncomfortably. The other parents exchanged glances but said nothing. Mrs. Whitmore's smile went rigid. Excuse me. I didn't lie. I didn't make anything up. I wrote about my dad. Her voice dropped to ice. Lucas, you have 2 choices. Apologize to this class for wasting our time with fantasy stories. Or you can spend the rest of the day in the principal's office. Which will it be? Lucas felt something settle in his chest. Something solid and unmovable. When my dad gets here, you'll see I was telling the truth, Mrs. Whitmore laughed. Actually laughed, in front of everyone. Lucas, your father is not coming. I don't know what's going on at home, but these elaborate stories need to stop. Now apologize or leave. Deshawn's chair scraped back. He stood up, his face furious. He's not lying. I've met his dad. Deshawn, office. Now, Mrs. Whitmore pointed at the door. I will not have this class turned into a circus. Lucas stood too. His legs didn't shake this time. His voice came out clear and strong. My name is Lucas Hughes. My father is General Vincent Hughes. He's a 4-star general in the United States Army. He commands strategic operations. And he's landing at Fort Myers in 45 minutes. The clock on the wall showed 9:47. Mrs. Whitmore opened her mouth to respond when the classroom door burst open. Principal Hayes stood there, her face flushed, slightly out of breath. Mrs. Whitmore. Hallway immediately. The 2 women stepped outside. Through the door's window, every student could see Hayes speaking urgently, her hands moving in sharp gestures. Mrs. Whitmore's face went from annoyed to confused to absolutely white. Lucas could read Hayes's lips. Fort Myers just called. Security detail. 4-star general, his son. Mrs. Whitmore's hand went to her throat. Outside, 3 black SUVs pulled up to the curb. Students nearest the windows noticed first. Whoa, look at those cars. Is that the Secret Service? The SUV doors opened. Security personnel in dark suits stepped out first, scanning the area with professional efficiency. Then the rear door of the center vehicle opened, and General Vincent Hughes emerged. The dress uniform was unmistakable. Dark blue, perfectly tailored, ribbons and medals arranged in precise rows across his chest. And there on each shoulder, 4 silver stars gleaming in the morning sun. He stood 6'3", his posture military perfect, his presence commanding without any effort at all. The general's walk toward the entrance was measured, controlled. The walk of a man who'd led soldiers through impossible situations and never lost his composure. Principal Hayes met him at the door, her professional mask barely concealing her panic. "General Hughes, I'm Principal Hayes. I cannot apologize enough for this situation. We had no idea. Where is my son?" The general's voice was quiet, but it carried the kind of authority that made people move. "Room 207. I'll take you there myself." "If I could just explain." "You can explain while we walk." They moved through the hallway. Hayes half jogging to keep pace, explaining in rushed sentences about the assignment. The misunderstanding, Mrs. Whitmore's assumptions. The general said nothing. Just listened with the focused attention of someone who'd spent decades evaluating intelligence reports and making life-or-death decisions. They reached room 207. The general opened the door. The effect was instantaneous. Every conversation stopped mid-word. Parents who'd been sitting stood up without thinking, responding to a presence that commanded respect by simply existing. Mrs. Whitmore, who just returned from the hallway, froze beside her desk. And Lucas saw his father. "Dad." The word came out small and broken and full of everything he'd been holding in. General Hughes crossed the room in 4 strides. He didn't tower over Lucas. He knelt down to his son's level, his uniform creasing, his medals pressing against his chest, and pulled Lucas into his arms. Everything Lucas had been holding inside released. The fear, the humiliation, the feeling of being called a liar in front of everyone he knew. He cried into his father's shoulder while the general held him, one hand on his back, the other cradling his head, whispering too quietly for anyone else to hear. "I've got you, I'm here, you're safe." When the general finally stood, he kept Lucas's hand in his. He turned to face Mrs. Whitmore directly. His voice was calm, professional, but underneath it ran something that made her take a step back. Where exactly was the confusion? Mrs. Whitmore's mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. "My son told you who I am. He wrote about my service. He shared something personal and true. So I'm trying to understand what part of that seemed unbelievable to you." She found her voice, barely. I didn't think, I assumed." Assumptions. The general's voice cut clean. "Assumptions about people based on how they look, where they come from, what we think we know about them. Those assumptions are usually wrong, and they're always dangerous. In my line of work, assumptions get people killed. In your line of work, they damage children who trust you." He turned to address the entire class, his voice warming slightly. "I apologize for disrupting your career day, but I want you all to know that every single word of Lucas's assignment is true. I've served in the United States Army for 32 years. I've been deployed to combat zones 7 times. I currently oversee strategic operations that I can't discuss in detail. But that involve coordinating efforts across multiple branches of service and allied nations. And Lucas wrote something in his assignment that I want to share with all of you." He pulled a folded paper from his jacket pocket. Lucas's assignment, smoothed out and carefully preserved. He wrote, "Leadership means serving others, not yourself. It means making hard choices and living with them. It means being honest even when it's uncomfortable." Lucas learned that from watching both his parents. His mother, who works as a trauma nurse and saves lives every single day. And me when I'm home. Which isn't as often as any of us would like. The general's eyes swept the room, making contact with each parent, each student. When a child tells you their truth, especially when that truth is difficult or doesn't match your expectations, the first instinct should be to listen, not to assume they're lying. Children deserve that basic respect. Mrs. Whitmore stepped forward, her face wet with tears. "General Hughes, Lucas, I don't have adequate words for how wrong I was. How deeply, profoundly wrong. I made assumptions based on prejudices I didn't even know I was carrying. I humiliated a child for telling the truth. I damaged trust that may never be repaired. I'm not asking for forgiveness because I don't deserve it. I'm just saying I'm sorry, and I will carry this shame for the rest of my career. I'm not the hero of this story. I'm the cautionary tale." The general studied her for a long moment. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a coin. A command coin, about the size of a silver dollar, with his unit's insignia on one side and the 4 stars of his rank on the other. "In the military, we give these to people who exemplify our values. But I'm giving you this for a different reason. Use it to remember that growth comes from our mistakes, not our successes. What matters is what you do next." Mrs. Whitmore took the coin with shaking hands. Principal Hayes appeared at the door with Deshawn, who'd been sitting in the office. The general crossed to him, extending his hand. "You stood up for my son, twice. That takes courage, thank you." Deshawn shook his hand, speechless for maybe the first time in his life. What happened next wasn't planned. The general gave an impromptu 20-minute presentation about service and leadership that had every student leaning forward in their seats. He talked about the soldiers he'd served with, the values that guided his decisions, the weight of responsibility. He answered questions with the same seriousness he'd give a briefing to the Joint Chiefs. When Tyler asked if he'd ever been scared, the general said, "Every single day." Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's doing what's right despite it. Before he left, someone took a photo. Lucas stood front and center, his hand still in his father's hand, surrounded by his classmates and teachers. That photo would go viral within 48 hours. That evening, the Hughes family sat together in their modest apartment. Lucas was tucked under his mother's arm on the couch, while his father sat across from them, still in his uniform. They processed the day in the quiet way families do when something significant has shifted. "I kept thinking people's ideas about me were wrong," Lucas said quietly. "But that doesn't change who I am." His father leaned forward. "Your worth doesn't come from my rank, Lucas. It comes from who you are, your honesty, your courage, your character. I'm proud to be your father. Not the other way around. But I do need to take some accountability here." The general continued. "I've kept such a low profile, insisted on such privacy, that I put you in an impossible position. We need to find a better balance." Lucas's mother spoke up. "So what happens now?" The general's expression hardened with purpose. "We make sure it never happens again." 3 months later, Jefferson Elementary looked different. Not in the physical building, but in the culture that breathed through its hallways. Every staff member had completed mandatory bias training, not the check-the-box kind, but intensive workshops facilitated by experts in educational equity. Mrs. Whitmore didn't just attend those trainings, she led them. At a faculty meeting in early February, she stood in front of her colleagues holding the command coin and told them exactly what she'd done, exactly how her assumptions had damaged a child, exactly how she was working to change. The school implemented new policies. Verify before questioning, contact parents first, approach student stories with curiosity rather than skepticism. Lucas founded a Truth and Trust program through the Student Council. Once a month, students in Mrs. Whitmore's class shared stories about their families, their backgrounds, their lives outside school. Sophia's mother's work cleaning houses was reframed as the hard physical labor that kept families running. Deshon's father's expertise as a mechanic became a discussion about skilled trades and problem-solving. Even Tyler talked about what he was learning about service and privilege. The photo of Lucas and his father went viral in ways the family never expected. Within 48 hours, it had been shared millions of times. But what made it different from typical viral stories was the focus on redemption. Mrs. Whitmore's transformation, the school's systemic changes. The way one moment of accountability led to institutional reform. Lucas today is more confident, more willing to share his story. He mentors younger students through a peer program. He, Deshon, Tyler, and Sophia formed what they call the Truth Squad, a group dedicated to making sure no kid at Jefferson ever feels dismissed or disbelieved again. General Hughes now attends school events when he can, usually in civilian clothes, usually standing in the back. But everyone knows who he is now, and more importantly, everyone knows who Lucas is. But this story isn't really about one teacher or one student, or one general walking into one classroom. It's about something happening in schools across this country every single day. Black boys disciplined more harshly for the same behaviors as their white peers. Students from working-class backgrounds assumed to be less capable. Children's truths dismissed because they don't match adult expectations.